and just to confirm, is a session on politics of the digitizing book industry. We lost one presentation, it was presented earlier, so we delayed it. And we are aiming to finish it within the half an hour. So 20 minutes for the presentation, 10 minutes for discussion, so that we can all go downstairs and hear the other presentation. So my name is Montoya, and I came here from the University of Sydney, and I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Dave Barker from the University of Derby. Over to you.
Thank you, Angela. Is that all right with everyone? I just think if people want the option of going to the second talk down below, then that seems to be a sensible thing to do. Yeah? Okay, all right.
So can I just ask, just very quickly, sorry,
It's all right.
the administrative question, what is the other presentation?
So the other presentation will be, I think, Lord.
It's the one on the program.
So it's the session 8, the second one. So so much for literary democracy.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Right.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. So yes, my name is Dr. David Barker from the University of Derby, and I'm just going to explain. I should have a different pair of glasses, but I don't, so I'm going to take my glasses off to read my script. The reason I brought a script along is that I have a tendency to go slightly off topic on different tangents, and I'm trying to stop myself from doing that. I might still do it, but I will try and stick to what I've got here. Anyway, so now you've gone all blurry. Right. The title of my talk today is the rather unwieldy Exploring the Coexistence of Print and Digital, Scholarly and Trade Content, which is a very long-winded way of saying, and apologies in advance because the next slide does contain the F word. So if you are offended by the F word, please look away now. Anyway, so it's a long-winded way of saying, if you could read that, the small bit there, how on earth does something like that end up on a digital platform created by an academic publisher? So if we try to unpick some of the metadata in this screenshot, we can see the cover image, we've got the series title up there, which is 33 1/3, we've got the book title, which is Black Sabbath's Master of Reality, that's the title of the book. We've got the chapter title, which is October 11, 1985, that's the title of the chapter. We've got my favourite bit over here, the DOI, the Digital Object Identifier for this chapter. Yeah, not the book, but the actual chapter. And we've got the complete contents of the chapter, which is that sentence there that begins with the rude word. That's the whole chapter. All right? So a little quick background before we get too much further into this. The digital platform on which this lives is called Bloomsbury Music and Sound, which was launched in 2018. I worked at Bloomsbury Academic from 2011, when Bloomsbury acquired Continuum, which was the company that I worked for previously, until late 2016, when I was made redundant. Largely because I wasn't very good at faking my enthusiasm for this kind of digital content. I promise this is no kind of like revenge motive thing going on here. I simply want to explore this type of platform as a fascinating example of the publishing industry reacting very cleverly to technological change and exploiting that change to its advantage, while still performing the traditional publishing tasks which dominated the industry in the 20th century. And I want to ask if there is anything the wider publishing industry could learn from such platforms, which I think to an extent fly under the radar of most people who work at the bigger commercial houses. Right, I will preface this next slide by saying I am generally and genuinely, I always get those, I feel like merging those two words into one. Anyway, I had a colleague once from Germany who merged in any event into a lovely word called an event. And I kind of want to do that with genuinely and generally. Anyway, sorry, I'm going on a tangent, aren't I? I'm generally hopeless at drawing diagrams, but I've had a go here in a visual which shows in a very simplified way one view of where the publishing industry is today. So you've got trade content up here, and depending on the type of trade content, it can work equally well in print formats or digital formats, hence why I've made those green arrows about the same size. And then we've got academic content, which mostly works in digital, but with a little bit still of print, okay? You will notice that I've used the words consumer and non-consumer here, which I've stolen from how Bloomsbury named its publishing divisions. And I remember working there on the day that this new naming convention was announced, and oh, how we laughed, right? Imagine you're working as an academic editor and you have to tell your academic author, who had written, let's say, a very readable study of LGBTQ venues in London since the 1980s, that their book would be marketed and promoted only to non-consumers. Right? But of course, like so many things at Bloomsbury, the grown-ups knew what they were doing, and consumer/non-consumer can be a very useful way, I think, of framing the main channels into which content can be sold. Again, apologies for my drawing skills, but what if these containers or frames, whatever we want to call them, are a bit less rigid, and what if there are certain types of content which could blur these boundaries, the boundaries between consumer and non-consumer, print and digital? So if we rewind exactly 20 years, September 2003, that was the launch of this particular book series called 33 1/3. They are, if you don't know them, short, how we pitched it, short books about classic albums. That's the concept of the series. It's very straightforward. We launched it in September 2003 with 6 books which were about albums by, oh god, hang on, why do I do this to myself? Dusty Springfield, Neil Young, The Smiths, The Kinks, Love, and Pink Floyd. Right, there we go. So those are the first 6 books. The original remit of the series was to publish print books aimed at consumers. Nothing more than that, nothing less than that. Very straightforward, old-fashioned publishing. There were at the start no ebook editions and no audiobook editions until 2008, when we signed a deal with Audible, and we also started to make simple ebook editions available. Ebooks and audiobooks didn't sell at all, certainly in those first few years. It was very heavily a print-focused series. I think part of the reason for that was that the books were seen to be slightly collectible, in that it wasn't me, it was my friend Bob, who had the genius idea of putting numbers on the spines of each of these books. So I think, as I suspect most of you know, once you do that, people start becoming a bit obsessive about it, and if you've got one missing in your collection, you need to have that one, otherwise it looks weird. Right. And you can't get that via from Kindle, I don't think. Thompson and others have written about the confluence of print and digital moving forward, most recently with regard to trade/consumer publishing, and the differences between various fiction and non-fiction genres, types of book, romance, cookbook, self-help, etc., and what the consumer market, what formats the consumer market seems to want that type of content, those types of content in. In the academic and professional sphere, there's excellent work by scholars like Paul. Is she in the room? No, she's not. Anyway, I'll tell her. Looking in particular at this kind of innovative digital platform and the possibilities in particular for publishers collaborating in new and creative ways in order to get these somewhat cumbersome, expensive, complicated products off the ground. In this case, the only collaboration was with an external website consultancy who had already built a framework onto which several different Bloomsbury academic platforms could be built, hammered, nailed, whatever, you know, that kind of thing. The main work involved with this one was digitizing and tagging all of the 33 1/3 books, and also a multi-volume popular music reference set, EPMO, the Encyclopedia of Popular Music of the World, which started in 1987 and is still being worked on. So that was all done in order to generate enough content with which to launch, providing the comprehensive list and depth of output described by Paul here. So how come a niche but very commercial print consumer series like 33 1/3 was ripe for becoming the foundation for a digital platform like this? As per Hall, again, it transpires that brand recognition is of very high importance in this sphere. These platforms are being promoted and sold, often via demonstrations in person and one-on-one meetings by digital sales reps. They're real human beings, they're not holograms, but that's what their job title can be. To librarians, to higher education librarians using a subscription model. Perpetual access sales are also available, but the annual subscription model tends to be much more popular. So either the publisher or the imprint or the content itself needs to have a very strong reputation in order to justify the expense, which can be anywhere between £1,000 and £5,000 per year to each institution which wishes to subscribe. Anyway, oddly, aside from rabid consumer music fans and geeks, the one constituency which happened to love the 33 1/3 series in print the most was academic librarians. Not long after the series started publishing in 2003, I would occasionally receive emails from librarians across North America, which was where we were based at that time, attaching photos of all of their 33 1/3 print books beautifully lined up on the shelves of their library. And years later, this was borne out by market research conducted by Bloomsbury's digital team during the proposal stage for this platform. And note here the charming elitism of the UK Russell Group universities. Further evidence of this appeared post-launch when the platform was positively reviewed in outlets like Choice, used by 2,400 academic libraries, or so they claimed. That phrase, not peer-reviewed, but certainly scholarly, anyway, not peer-reviewed, but certainly scholarly, offers an interesting insight, I think, into the potential for more trade/academic crossover content, at least in the eyes of a publication like Choice, which is highly regarded in North America. None of this, I guess, should be terribly surprising. Eisenhardt, back in 1994, in his book Publishing in the Information Age, apologies for the blurriness of this table, predicted most of it. But what fascinates me here is that one book series, one collection of content, can, in effect, function perfectly well on both sides of that table there. And if you had told me this back in 2003 when the series was launching with print books, I would have thought, and all of my colleagues I think would have thought at that point that you were completely mad that this would end up happening like this. I particularly like Eisenhardt's contrast of technology bound, about 3 down on the left, and technology inspired, being information age, and also product focused and market focused as well, which I think is a very interesting shift. But if we have a product that performs both of these functions, don't they cannibalize each other in some way? I interviewed the relevant Bloomsbury academic editor earlier this month, who told me that, and there's the quote, "The success of the music and sound platform has had no visible impact on sales of the print series. It's like we're serving two completely separate audiences." And this is now giving me flashbacks to, is that Caroline back there? I remember it there, yeah. It's reminding me slightly of experiments that Caroline used to do at Bloomsbury, where you would make open access books available as fully open access books, but also make the print editions available, and it didn't seem to have any impact. Sometimes it actually increased the sales of the print book, didn't it? So there's something in that. So what are these two completely separate audiences, and how does that align with consumer/non-consumer and the print-digital frameworks that we discussed earlier? In a 2019 talk at the Charleston Library Conference, Catherine Earle, full disclosure, a former colleague, set out the business thinking behind Bloomsbury Digital Resources. a separate, dedicated business unit charged with creating, marketing, and selling digital products directly to the academic library market. So largely, this business unit is based around the premise that academic publishers can generate revenue from selling digital content to libraries, even when much of that content is already owned by those same libraries and has already been paid for in print format. To put it cynically, the digital revolution was an invitation for some publishers to print, no pun intended, money. Can academic publishers really be that cynical? Good answer, thank you. I better speed up, hadn't I? There was an awareness early on that the 33 1/3 series was different because of its consumer print position in the market. Looking at this analysis from an internal launch document, we see that there was a desire to, quote, protect adoption and trade sales with an interesting comparison to the VSI series, Very Short Introductions, published by OUP. Another example, I think, of scholarly content which successfully blurs the lines between trade and academic and between print and digital. But now that the 33 1/3 series has this dual life, does the digital platform side of that impact the way in which the books are commissioned? How compatible is this very modern form of information age publishing with the more traditional instinct-driven methods used by trade editors? Let's look at another quote from Catherine Earle at the Charleston Conference. As we can see, this language and thinking fits perfectly with Eisenhardt's market-focused forecast from 1994. The ultimate goal, I would suggest, is very similar to how editors and publishers have always seen their job to benchmark or predict, really, the likely success of any new product. But talking about end users and data so specifically does feel different, and perhaps something that other sectors of the industry could learn from, although to me it still sounds a bit soulless. And then let's compare that with my own reflections on commissioning and curating the 33 1/3 series from a 2021 article in the Journal of Cultural Analysis and Social Change. Now clearly that was me reflecting on the motivations behind my own commissioning process for this content 20 years ago, but the language does seem remarkably different to that used by Catherine Earle in the previous slide. That method and language sounds a bit more romantic, thinking creatively, etc., compared to the cold, hard logic behind Bloomsbury Digital Resources. But we could argue that my approach was more open to problems of editorial bias. As I state in that article, what ended up happening with the series was that I was effectively racist and sexist by not platforming non-white and female writers and artists. Indeed, when I interviewed the current editor for 33 1/3 at Bloomsbury, she said, the existence of the platform has driven my commissioning on the series to be more global. So the existence of this digital platform and the wider reach of those markets in academic libraries has changed the way in which these books are being commissioned, which I find rather fascinating. What binds the two approaches together, I might suggest, is there in the words at the top, increasing title count. Trade and academic publishers are both driven by the need to keep the content pipeline flowing, whether it's new celebrity memoirs or linguistic monographs. These digital platforms simply don't work without a very large volume of content. Indeed, many of them proudly display their vital statistics on their home pages, as we can see. I'll just whiz through these. So that's Bloomsbury Music and Sound, 1,000 plus genres, 700 plus artists. This is Grove Music Online, 52,000 articles, nearly 9,000 scholars. So it's numbers, amount of data. Look at this, and here's my favorite one. Oxford Handbooks Online, this is from a year ago, 270 million words, etc., etc., etc. So the amount of data is a key selling point here. Last bit I commented. So, working towards a conclusion here, is it possible that other publishers could be trying more things like this? The blurring of boundaries between what is and is not trade content, and how that same content can be sold to utterly different audiences in different formats. Could we imagine Hachette, for example, creating a digital platform for the high-quality history books on its Hodder and John Murray imprints going back decades. Or Pan Macmillan doing something similar with its deep list of politics books. Or at Penguin Random House, the prestigious Penguin Press imprint packed with Nobel and Pulitzer Prize winning authors. University libraries already stock many of these books in print and sometimes in e-book formats too. Or perhaps the authors and agents involved, you can imagine Andrew Wiley mentioned yesterday as the widow hunter. I always thought he was called the jackal, but that's a whole other discussion. Anyway, getting a bit hacked off about the lower royalties associated so far with these kinds of platforms. Although, given the evidence we have from Bloomsbury so far, if there is no risk of such digital hubs cannibalizing sales of other book formats, then surely any revenue generated is simply extra revenue. Finally, one more issue to explore here is around product categories, content types, labels, and how maybe they can hinder rather than help the industry. Catherine Earle again is speaking here only about academic publishing back in 2019, but is she onto something? In our age of content, which is now about to buckle under the strain of limitless new AI-generated content, do publishers need to be stricter about their category labels and content types, or should they try being more fluid with it all? If all that matters is serving the needs of end users, then maybe it's the latter. To conclude, there is more research that I want to undertake around this, but maybe there are other ways of blending this diagram from a few minutes ago so that the circle in the middle can expand to contain more content, more authors, and more publishers. And perhaps the borders between academic and trade content could become more porous.
Are there any questions?
Yes.
Really interesting, David. Thank you. How do you see this potential movement from sort of trade to academic fitting with the sort of tendency recently for academic publishers to be sort of setting up their own trade lists, trying to sort of move in the opposite direction?
That's a really good point, isn't it? I mean, as long as I worked in academic publishing, there were fierce arguments on both sides of this, i.e., should academic publishers focus solely on the library market and give marketing content to scholars, or should they be tempted by the more exciting, glamorous, those are wrong words, but you know what I mean, possibility of having a book that might take off, a scholarly book that might reach a wider audience. Certainly when I worked at Continuum, we were trying that kind of thing. When we got acquired by Bloomsbury, there was more of a vibe of let's just focus, and I think that's particularly a Bloomsbury thing because Bloomsbury already have their enormous trade side, so they wanted to very much differentiate that with the academic side. But you know, then you've got university presses that do some trade books really well, haven't you? You've got OUP who've always had some kind of trade division, so it's, I don't know is the answer, but I hope it keeps shifting and blurring or whatever, because I think as scholars, part of our job is to get our work out there, whatever discipline we're working in. If we can manage to find a topic and a way of writing about it that is of interest to a wider audience, then there should be publishers out there who are willing to make that effort. But then that feeds into open access as well, doesn't it? Sorry,
Yeah, in the Australian context, we've got two university presses who show where one of them does it really well and the other one kind of bungled it.
Right.
Queensland University Press has a good, am I correct, David, where they do a very nice combination between trade
They're
and
really trade
academic.
publisher.
Yeah.
Very few, but very
But-
little academic publisher.
But Melbourne University Publishing
They
went down the
bundled.
route of trying to do more trade, and then the publisher basically got sacked.
Right.
And then the editorial board has now said no, only academic monographs.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
But yeah, this is interesting, like the open access and trade publishing, because, like, you know, I spent years working at a university press. Basically, open access books will not necessarily get reviewed in the press and the media, so there's sort of like a different market. So, yeah. And any other questions?
Yeah.
I know that you're focusing more on sort of the publishing aspect, the market aspect, but I couldn't help but think about sort of, you know, in this sort of maybe generative and positive aspect of making these boundaries porous between academic and trade publishing, if there isn't also maybe some danger, or like, you know, I'm thinking of like some ongoing cultural maybe issues that we haven't figured out yet in terms of information literacy, you know, like or amateur versus expert knowledge production, thinking of like teaching undergraduates what is, you know, scholarly and what isn't. I don't know, I'm wondering if we could talk about that a little bit, maybe in relation to this obviously very good thing of getting more scholarly work into more sort of trade audiences, but then also, you know, as you mentioned in that early slide sort of humorously, this is not peer reviewed knowledge. And does that matter?
I think you're right. I think there is a risk there and a danger there, because I do think we want our students, as you say, to be very clear on, and the wider population, and we all need to be very clear on what is rigorously believable and well researched and what is a bit more speculative or less trustworthy. And I find it very weird that this has ended up happening to this book series, because it was not in any way conceived as a scholarly project, and yet somehow, because it ended up having a few academic authors contributing books to it, because even we, some of us academics, like writing a book about our favourite record, right? That's quite a tempting thing. But you know, there are books in that series which are works of fiction, and you know, you see the reviews on Amazon. Like, I wanted to buy a book about the making of this record, and it's a stupid story about some teenager in a mental health institution, which is what that Black Sabbath one is. It's his diary, this kid. So I'm not really answering your question, but I do think you're absolutely right. I think, is that a case of a system of tagging, coding, flagging up somehow what types of content are, you know, however much we're trying to sell them, however much we're trying to disseminate this stuff, does it need labels of some kind on it to say this has been rigorously peer reviewed? You know, even at Bloomsbury Academic, we claimed we were doing peer review on a lot of our monographs, and a lot of the time it was very, very patchy, frankly. So I think even within different academic publishing companies, it varies wildly, doesn't it? The amount of rigor that's being put into that stuff.
Yeah, thanks.
I want to know also what's your favourite record?
I used to get asked that in New York quite a lot. Like, which book would you want to write? And it's not me trying to be obscure, but it is the first album by Aztec Canberra, which came out in 1983, called Highland Hard Rain, and it's just a beautiful Scottish pop record. And he wrote it when he was 16, and I don't understand how he did it. So I would like to interview him and explore that.
Very good.
Caroline.
Hi. I was quite intrigued by your comment that you might, you know, see in the future companies like Penguin Press actually creating their own digital platforms for content. I mean, you know, one of the issues here is, of course, that, you know, you talk about digital holographic reps, and, you know, the academic publishers have this huge, you know, infrastructure for reaching academic channels, library channels, which trade publishers don't have. And I was very much aware of this when I was also made redundant by the as a club. I went immediately to commission for a small trade publisher called Biteback Publishing. And Biteback asked me to come and do this because I was a politics publisher, and I'd done some trade publishing at Bloomsbury alongside my academic, and they wanted semi-academic, semi-trade things that they could sell to academic markets. I did them. Could they sell them to academic markets? They could not, because they had no inroads into the library market. Now, Penguin Press and Biteback are big beasts, obviously. But can you see, you know, what would be the solution to that? Can you see partnerships between academic publishers with big trade presses? I mean, Bloomsbury are obviously in a good place because they do both. Penguin, not so much.
I think that's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? I find it very odd that Bloomsbury in the UK is the only sizable publishing company that is fully committed to both very commercial and very academic publishing, and they made it work. You know, the only reason they started doing the academic side was because of Harry Potter. It was literally because of Harry Potter finishing, book 7 came out, and the shareholders and the people who owned the company had a full-on panic attack, and they said, we're never going to have that massive, exciting roller coaster of money ever again. Can you come up with a way of making more predictable revenue sources? And Nigel and Richard and whoever was there at the time were like, we will launch an academic publishing, and they've done it brilliantly. But because that's being done once by a trade commercial publishing house, I don't see why it couldn't be done again. You look at a company like Hachette, some of its acquisitions in recent years have been academic, semi-academic, Jessica Kingsley, that kind of stuff. So they've got the clout to do it, they've got the money to spend on building this infrastructure, and like Bloomsbury, once you've built it once, it becomes less expensive every time you do a new platform. But I do know what you mean, like would they be able to go to university libraries and say, you can trust our content? I think with some of it they could,
Could they go to Oxford University Press and say, you know, have our content on the platform?
Yeah. So I think there are potential partnerships like that, yeah.
Oh,
I think I know the answer to this question, but I know these books and I like some of them. They are a bit odd. But when you read it, you want to listen to the music.
Right.
And I presume that there's rights issues at the beginning, so there's no.
Yeah,
as part of the digital version.
They did explore that when they were putting this platform together, like could we get the music on the platform? So far they haven't managed it. What they have managed is a partnership with Spotify recently, where they've built a podcast series hosted by some quite big music, I don't listen to it, some quite big music name people who discuss the albums, and I think they play little clips, and they discuss the books at the same time, so that's a kind of interesting mash of that. But I think that the legal complexity around getting the actual album music onto it, I think that's probably insurmountable. Might be wrong.
Any other questions? If not, we are just 1:30.
Perfect.
Perfect timing.